Hello everyone and welcome to the Hidden Lives of Writers. My name's Fiona Snickers and I'm joined by my co-host Gail Schimmel.
Good morning everyone.
Gail, how has your week been?
So Fiona, where do I start? I think one of the reasons we're doing this podcast is we want to give people a real insight into what it's like being a working writer and how one does the business of writing day in, day out. And the truth of the matter is I have hit a slight wall. I think I talked last week about I'm finding the stage that I'm in harder than I usually find it for where I am in a book. Mm-hmm. And this week I've written 500 words, which, as you know, is what I normally do as a minimum in a day. I've done this week. Right. And I've actually realized I need to stop. I need to regroup. I need to give myself a break. Right. And I have decided I am not going to be writing. Except the Katie Gayle stuff, I'm not going to be writing for the rest of this month. I'm going to give my brain a little chance to recover, figure out what it wants to do, and then have an edit that I need to do. So the next month or two will be on that edit, and then I will come back to this project and decide whether or not it's worth finishing. But it's been quite a process getting there, and I'm feeling half very good about this decision and half a bit, well, what am I going to do if I don't write?
What led you to hitting this wall? Did you read over stuff you'd written and you weren't happy with it? Or were you just losing momentum? What actually happened?
I'm not sure. It's not that I'm not happy with what I've written, because last time in this project that I hit a wall, I reread it and I was, you know what, this is actually quite good. I must carry on. I must finish it.
Right.
And I'm hoping that when I come back to it, that's what will happen. But I think I'm having a more existential crisis about what sort of writer I am and what I want to be writing. And I think I need to stop writing.
Okay.
To resolve that. This has never happened to me before. And I'll report back. I'll let you know what happens. What also I was thinking about as I was thinking about that this is what I wanted to talk about today. By the time this episode is, I will know how it's played out. And anyone who wants to know how it's played out, contact us on social media and I'll tell you. But I almost feel like it makes me see there will be a solution, because I know by the time I hear myself saying this again, I will know what has happened.
Okay, well, that's a hopeful thought.
Fiona, what about you?
Well, yeah, I also don't have good news this week. I thought I would, because I thought I was going great guns on a project. I have a publisher who is almost ready to greenlight a new series that I'm writing, and looked at a sort of fairly detailed proposal and said, okay, let's see 10,000 words. Let's see how that looks. So I thought, okay, great. I know exactly where this is going. And I sat down and wrote the 10,000 words over many days. And I really thought it was going well, because each time when I came back to the screen, I was rereading what I'd written the week before. And I thought, oh, this is so smooth. This is so good. And I hit the 10,000 word mark, and I was actually looking forward to going back and editing myself and sort of seeing what I'd written. And I started that process this morning, and it is dire. I cannot believe the trap that I've fallen into. You know, you start thinking after a while that you're quite a seasoned writer who doesn't make those rookie mistakes. And I have said on panels, I think I've said here, that you do not start a book by introducing your character's backstory and familiarizing the
start in the action.
Yes, exactly. And I did not start in the action. I started with my character thinking about why she needed a change in her life, why things were not working for her, what was going wrong, what had gone wrong in the past, and why she now needed a change. And it was so boring. I was boring myself.
And it's the worst.
Big mistake. And I realized that I'm not ready to read over this thing and just sort of polish it up and send it off. It needs a comprehensive rewrite. We need to see her in crisis. We need to see the crisis happening in real time, and then her coming to the realization that something needs to change. You cannot have the first even 3 pages happening inside your character's head. You just can't do it.
At the risk of giving writing advice at the wrong end of the program, I often drop my first chapter Once I'm finished the book, I often realize that first chapter was a warm-up exercise.
Right.
And I drop it. And weirdly, don't even have to put it in anywhere else because it was so unnecessary.
That is so interesting. Yeah, I think I'm almost in the process of dropping my first chapter.
Maybe see what happens if you start reading at chapter 2.
Yeah, interesting. Okay, so yeah, it's not always smooth. Bad news happens, and that's what we're trying to show, that you have bad days and good days, and the bad days are as much of the process as the good days. But we all need to fill up the well somehow. So what have you been reading or watching or listening to this week?
So unusually for me, I've been watching things and I've had a bit of a thematic watching. I've watched 2 movies this week, and Fiona, I don't think you've ever heard me say that sentence before, and I don't know, it will be a long time before I say it again, but I have watched 2 movies this week, one on Netflix, which is a movie, I've had to write it down, Life or Something Like It. I don't know why or how I stumbled on this movie, but I think I thought I was going to be watching a series. It's a 2002 movie with a very blonde Angelina Jolie, and I can't decide if she looks magnificent or really awful. And it is a story about what is our life's meaning. What happens is a psychic on a street predicts that she will die next Thursday.
Oh my goodness.
And she starts reevaluating her life and does a whole lot of strange things because of it. And at the end, was quite disturbed by it and had to go back and look up what year it was made to put it in context, because it's very much that old trap of a woman gives up her dreams to be with her man. And that it's packaged as a good thing because she is now the more moral person and the more devoted to the good things in life and less obsessed with the superficial and less obsessed with glamour and achievement and more interested in having a good, wonderful life.
Oh, my goodness.
Yeah, and it reminded me a little bit of Grease, which, as much as the songs have held out, the plot of Grease really is quite a disturbing thing to let your teenage daughter watch these days.
It is, yes.
And it gave me that feeling. And then I watched another movie. My daughter's school had a movie night, and they played a movie called Soul, which is a wonderful animated movie about a man who, on the day that he's a musician, and he suddenly gets his big break, and then he dies.
Okay.
And he doesn't want to die. So his soul doesn't want to do what it's supposed to do. And his soul kind of gets lost in it won't follow the light and go up to where it's supposed to go. And what's lovely about the movie is it doesn't really speculate on where it's supposed to go. There is no religious overtone, except insofar as it says there's an afterlife and a before life. And because he doesn't go up to the afterlife, he kind of stumbles and falls and ends up in the before life with all the little baby souls. And it's also about what is the meaning of life, what makes our lives valuable, but done in such a lovely, sweet, animated but meaningful way. I came out of it really thinking about the meaning of my life, and I wondered why this movie isn't better known. And then I looked at the date of that. It's a 2020 release.
Oh, got swallowed by COVID,
and none of us are aware of it. And just what a lovely movie, and a perfect family movie that kids see on one level, adults on another level. So that one I can recommend. Soul.
Yeah, I think I'll give that one a go, and I'll give the Angelina Jolie a skip, because I don't really want to see a woman coming to a realization that her true life lies in domesticity rather than a career and achievement. Okay.
She kept her job, but not the big glamorous dreams she had had and that she had made happen.
Oh boy. Okay. Yeah.
What about you?
Yeah, so I've been reading one of your recommendations, which is Romantic Comedy by Curtis Sittenfeld. And I'm absolutely loving it. And it is itself a romantic comedy. And I was trying to put my finger on what it does so well. And I think it is because it is not predictable. You've spoken on here before about how in romantic comedies, it's very difficult to sustain tension because you know from the beginning which two people are going to end up together. So, where's the doubt? Where's the tension? Where's the investment coming from? And in this one, I'm almost at the end, and I am still not sure that the two main characters are going to end up together. I think maybe they're just having a kind of interlude, which will change both their lives. I genuinely do not know. And that uncertainty is lovely. And at some point I thought, oh no, she's going to end up with a dependable co-writer who's been there all along. She'll have a fling with the glamorous singer, and then she'll go back to the boy who's been sitting opposite her all along. And now I don't think that's going to happen, and I still don't actually know. And for a romantic comedy to sustain that kind of genuine doubt is quite an achievement, and it has kept me absolutely gripped.
And Curtis Sittenfeld's writing, you can't go wrong.
Our guest today is Kate Sidley. Kate is the author of The Agony Chef, which was a 2012 cookbook with fictional agony aunt columns side by side with recipes. Kate wrote 100 Mandela Moments in 2018, a book for babies, which was part of the wonderful Book Dash project. It was called What Is It? Kate is a co-author with Gail Schimmel of the Katie Gayle Cozy Mysteries.
That's me.
That's you. And Kate has written or co-written or ghost-written 6 projects, including The Elephants of Tula Tula. Kate, hello and welcome. We are so happy to have you in the studio.
I'm so happy to be here. I've been enjoying your podcast, and it's nice to be on this side of it. Thank you.
Kate, I feel a little bit like I am interviewing myself in some ways here because we have become so co-brained recently. How has your writing week been, Kate?
My writing week, well, for me, every week is a writing week. It's been good, actually. I've had a good week. I've been working, you'll be pleased to hear, on the 5th Julia Bird mystery in the Katie Gayle series that we do together. And I think we've got a delivery deadline for about 6 weeks' time. So I've been very busy on that. So there you go. And I have another project that I'm working on at the same time, which is one of my commissioned works. And that project is at a very administrative part of the process, because I'm getting ready to send that to the publisher and looking at archival material and pictures and so on. Just something I don't always do. But anyway, it's been quite fun, but not much writing.
So you choose the pictures for the book?
In conjunction with somebody else, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. In fact, with an archivist, yeah.
Are we allowed to talk about this project, or is it one of those projects you're not allowed to talk about? Okay.
Yeah, probably not.
So this is one of the things that's fascinating about your work, but we'll look into in more depth, is that sometimes it's top secret. Can I ask Fiona, before I allow you to speak, the part I don't know about Kate is her superhero origin story, and that is what I want to know. I want to know how you started writing, what brought you to writing, what brought you to ghostwriting, but where it started.
Okay. I think that most writers started writing because they were readers. I think most of us came to writing through reading. I was always a bookish child. I loved reading, even as a young child. My mother was a big reader, and she was in fact a book editor as one of her careers. And I grew up in the UK, in a sort of a smallish place outside of London. And I think probably typically of people of my type and age, that was what we did. We played in the garden, and we did our own kind of plays, and we did our own circuses, and we did our own, we had Wendy houses and, dressed the dog up and, those kind of mild childhood activities because we didn't have devices. So I think there was a lot of kind of imaginative play that we did at that sort of time. And I guess a lot of reading, I was very much steeped in that English tradition of Enid Blyton, The Wind in the Willows, A.A. Milne. I was very drawn always to humour. I think Gail and I have actually discussed our shared love for Gerald Durrell and My Family and Other Animals and those kinds of books. And yeah, I guess that's where my writing life started. I mean, it was reading and sort of creative, imaginative play. And then I was sort of good at English at school, one of those sort of girls. And I kind of fell into magazine publishing, quite fortunately, when I did a BA in English and politics. And
how does one fall into something that took me many attempts in vain to break into it? I had to sort of bash down a wall. How do you fall into that?
Well, I was clever enough not to develop any other skills. So I was only left with writing and bookishness. So I actually got a job as a very junior editorial assistant at a magazine publishing house. Mm-hmm. And that's what I did for quite a number of years, actually. I was in magazine publishing, and it was a small publisher, and we did business to business and a few others. We did a travel magazine, and I sort of got to do all the editorial type things, sort of a bit of low level writing, subbing up press releases, proofreading, all that kind of thing. And it was kind of a fun introduction to that world. And I think in those days as well, because I was kind of young and didn't have a proper writing job, I would go everywhere. I'd go to the print works, or, I'd go to see some client who had a widget, go off to the East Rand and do that, go to the ad agency for something. So it was kind of nice exposure to the working world. But really my thing was really writing and editing. And I sort of came to it from that side, and then started writing more features and that kind of thing. Yeah.
Okay. And how did you first get approached to write on behalf of somebody, a sort of commissioned project? One could call it ghostwriting or co-writing. How did you come to that? Were you approached?
I was approached. I'd written a lot of magazine work, so the publishers sort of knew me from there. And I'd also got involved in reviewing books and interviewing authors and those kind of things. And I was the books columnist at the Sunday Times for about 3 years, I think it was. So I knew all of the publishers, and I'd done a certain amount of work, in that field. And I was approached actually to do the Mandela book. I'd also done the Agony Chef, the humorous cookbook, with Pan Macmillan. And I was approached to do the Mandela book as part of the 100-year celebration. So that was the first commissioned book that I did. And thereafter it sort of took off. I was just very lucky. I mean, somebody approached me to do my first ghostwriting book, which was again, I don't really like to sort of go into who I did what for, but for quite a well-known person. And that went well. And I learned a lot, and I did that. And as you know, I've done 6 now. So I think once people know that you can do it, and you have done it, and there've been no major disasters, and you haven't had a nervous breakdown or disappeared off into the, into the night. Then I've been invited to do others, and it's been really fun. It's been really nice, interesting work.
And Kate, from what I understand, it's really tight deadlines. It's not like writing a novel where you can take as long as you like because nobody's really waiting for it. The publishers say to you, I want it in 3 months. Am I right?
3 months would be pretty tight. I haven't done one in 3 months, but it would, 5 months or maybe 6 months would probably be the norm. Yeah, but it is, they're often somewhat time sensitive. And you know what it's like. Once someone's got an idea, they want it done.
And talk us through the process of doing that, because again, you can't just sit down by yourself and write the book. You're working with somebody else. Can you talk us about what does that look like?
Yeah, so it's really a very collaborative process. And I mean, it's interesting. I've only sort of more recently thought about how, everything I do now is collaborative almost, because my collaborations in Katie Gayle and my collaborations with the various other projects that I do. So what normally happens mostly, if I take a typical example of what I do, it would be a single person narrative. So it'll be, one person who's done something interesting or has an interesting life or whatever the case may be. And we will sit down together and shape a book. And it's really interview based. The way I do it, I don't know what other people do. But what I do is we ideally meet for a couple of hours, maybe once a week or once every 2 weeks. And I interview the person. I let them ramble quite a lot, but I kind of shape the conversation. I tape the conversation and I work from there. So that's how it works. And it's quite an interesting relationship because it's quite intimate in one way. I mean, we get to know each other very well. I get to know them a lot better than they get to know me. But we spend a lot of time together and often, quite often people have been through trauma. It's not unusual to have sort of a bit of crying. It's quite an intimate relationship. I mean, a few people have said to me, it's a bit like therapy, which I don't really think it is. I think it's a very different role, but it has something of that quality. Like you're sitting in a room together and someone is telling you their story. It's quite a delicate balance of personalities and relationships, because you do need to guide them into, to keep them on track. You need to interrogate their version of their story sometimes in kind of subtle way, because everyone has a way of telling their story that they know. And you'll say, I was born here and I did this and I did that, blah, blah, blah. And obviously I'm trying to get to something deeper or different often. So yeah, it's an interesting relationship, and it's an interesting position to be in.
I've always thought that if I see a personality or a celebrity or somebody that something interesting has happened to, and I see that they've got a book out, I look at it and I see, is it so-and-so writing with Jane Smith? And then I know, okay, this is as told to a professional writer who's produced it. Or is it just personality A has now come out with their book? And I've always thought that if only one person's name appears on the cover and in the foreword and in the preface, there's no mention of anybody else, that means nobody else was ever involved. So are you telling us that quite often there is somebody behind the scenes, a real proper ghost who is kept completely anonymous? Well,
I guess it's sort of a scale of anonymity and attribution. So at the front of end, and for example, the Elephants of Tula Tula, it says Francois Malby Antony with Kate Sidley. If you look at some of the other books, if you look in the acknowledgements, I'm quite extensively acknowledged. They'll say, who wrote this book with, and then there's sort of gradations of that. Some people don't want to have any other name attached to it. I think you can safely say that if somebody's main skill is, kicking a rugby ball or, I don't know, swimming across the Atlantic or whatever, they've written a book, they've probably had some help with it. It's interesting how people respond to that though, because, we all have help in different ways, and even people who write their own stories, they're often heavily edited, heavily worked a lot closely with editors and with publishers and so on. So, stories are shaped in different ways. And I think that's true of probably all stories to a greater or lesser extent.
Okay. Kate, we've talked about this before because I cannot bear it on your behalf, but you don't mind. But you wrote a very high profile one where you got no acknowledgement, and I got furious every time that book was mentioned. Like I went into a rage every time.
Sorry, Gail. I know it was very hard for you.
Like that's Kate's work. But you've made peace with that.
Yeah, I have. I mean, I think it is a difficult situation. I mean, sometimes I do think, it would be fairer to be acknowledged. But the fact of the matter is that this is my job, and I chose to do that job under those conditions, and that's the way it is. And I think that sometimes people sort of feel, I can see that, you two probably do as well, that it's almost cheating on their behalf. You know what I mean?
Yes,
they didn't write the book, but in a way they did. We sort of collaborated and sort of wrote it together. And I mean, I'm okay with that. I am.
I'm just interested to know what is behind that decision to keep your ghostwriter completely out of the picture. Is it, uncharitably, I want to say it's ego. The person wants everyone to believe that they can kick balls through goalposts, and they happen to be an extremely polished and accomplished writer at the same time. And then more charitably, I think maybe it has to do with authenticity. People want the audience to read this book and have the perception that this is my unfiltered work. These are my thoughts on the page. There hasn't been an intermediary, or if there has, that person's role was really quite irrelevant. This is me on the page and is therefore authentic. And I think maybe the reading public does receive it like that. They're sort of more impressed when nobody else's name appears on the cover. It's just interesting. What's going on there?
It is interesting. I think that one of the jobs that you do as a co-writer or a ghostwriter is to present the story in a way that feels authentic to the subject. So given that the kicker of the ball was not able to write it like that, you still want the kicker of the ball to feel that this is what, if he could write, this is what he would have written. This is genuinely and authentically his story. And this also brings up the very sort of tricky issue of voice, writing in his voice, or an approximation thereof, but somewhere between his voice and what you need to write an actual book. Because if you taped you or me and Gail talking, yakking around, that's not a book,
Right.
Even telling our own stories. So one of the things that you do as a ghostwriter or a co-writer is to create a story out of sort of pieces of information. You can start to go, I was born in 1973 and da-da-da. That's not usually very interesting. A story is more than a collection of bits of information or a collection of things that happen to a person. And that's the skill that the writer brings. One of the skills that the writer brings. And the other skill is to do it in a way that feels and sounds authentic to them. So I guess in a way it's a compliment to the writer that person feels that that's exactly how they would have written the book themselves. It feels authentic to them.
Right.
And I think very often it feels like they've written it themselves in a way,
I think before I ask my next question, we will clarify you have never written a book by a kicker of a ball. This is an analogy, so don't everyone go looking at all the kickers of balls who have written books and thinking Kate wrote them all.
That's why I chose that as an example, because it would be such an unimaginable thing for me to be writing that book.
I'm sure you would do a lovely job with a kicker of a ball. Kate, one of the things that I think people are curious about, and you don't have to name actual figures here, but with ghostwriting, how does it work financially compared to how it works for an ordinary writer? So an ordinary writer, you might get an advance and then you get royalties of sales of the books. I imagine it's different for a ghostwriter.
Yeah, so the way that I work is that I only work for publishers. So I generally do not, you can't come to me and say, please, will you write my story? I don't want to do that. I like to be in a contractual relationship with one of the big publishers in South Africa, and I know them and they know me and I trust them and I know I'll get paid and they know I'll do the job, and, so that makes the relationship quite a bit easier. And then, there's a fee. It's a negotiated fee. I think in my case, I think in most people's cases, there's not a royalty arrangement.
Okay.
Oh, interesting. Yeah. I was wondering about that.
Yeah.
Okay. So you get a flat fee for turning the book in.
And again, I'm then going to rage if it sells a great number of copies, but Kate apparently doesn't go into rage. I'm much more given to raging on Kate's behalf.
You'd be less enraged if you'd got a check to start with, Gail.
Possibly.
So how do they match a writer with the personality? Do you have any insight into how that process works?
Not really. I can tell you that I'm generally only asked to do female subjects. So that's one aspect of it. I think they probably match me more with women for reasons of their own. I like to do stories that have some meaning or relevance or something to me. I really loved writing The Elephants of Tula Tula because it was issues that I cared about. I got to go to the bush. I liked the people, got to see the elephants, all that sort of thing. So, I mean, when I have a choice, I prefer to do something like that. And again, they're books that I wouldn't write.
Have you ever said no? That is one of my questions. Have you been approached with a book?
I've been approached with one or two slightly wonky ones that didn't really come through publishers. But I also wouldn't do, I don't know, someone who was doing a sort of whitewash version of, their role in state capture or the apartheid government or whatever. There are lots of things I probably wouldn't do. I probably wouldn't be asked to do them either.
I think the publishers probably understand where your line is.
Yeah, I'm sure they know who would do what well and willingly.
And if an exciting enough person came to you and asked you to do it privately, do you think you could be tempted into that?
Yeah, probably. I mean, I think it does make the relationship a little bit more difficult because the way that I look at what I do in these kinds of books is that I work for the publisher. The publisher has an arrangement with me and they have an arrangement with the subject. And I feel that that's kind of a cleaner arrangement than me having an arrangement with the subject. And the way that I speak to the subject about it is I will say to them, you know, I work for the publisher and I also work for the reader. And part of my job is to make a book that'll work for a reader. So you're not working for the subject in the same direct way. Do you understand why that? It's kind of a subtle difference, but it's quite meaningful to me.
It's actually very important because you're not employed by the subject, so the subject can't dictate to you how you do it to an extent that they would be able to if they were actually paying directly. That's quite interesting.
It's also a kind of acknowledgement of the professionalism of the task. You know, like I know how to write a book. The publisher agrees I know how to write a book. I also understand reader needs and how, you know, how to make that book the best it can be from a reader's point of view. So you're sort of somehow less directly beholden to the one person. I think it's a better relationship for everybody, not just for me.
And so your advice to a very interesting person with a very interesting life wanting a book ghostwritten would be approach the publishers, and the publishers will find you a ghostwriter.
I think so. I think the publisher can also get a better idea of whether that book is going to be commercially viable, whether it's really worth doing. I mean, if you want to do it because you want your grandchildren to know your fascinating life story, you know, that's a different kind of thing. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about, you know,
the publisher's not going to do that
at a higher level. So they would have a sense of that and what kind of book might work and what kind of book might sell and, you know, all that sort of thing. So I think there's a very important role for the publisher there. And also, you know, they bring that level of professionalism and editing and design and so on. So, yeah, I think the way that I do it works probably best for me if you can do it that way, or best for everyone.
Yeah. Very interesting.
Yeah.
I'm interested to know whether all of these relationships have gone swimmingly or whether there have been difficult moments along the way. Like maybe your chemistry with the person was a bit off at first, or there were clashes, or maybe you thought everything was going great, you turned in some chapters and the subject hated it. Has anything like that happened? Any clashes, differences of opinion?
No, it generally goes quite well. I think you need to find a rhythm and a pace and a sort of structure that works for the two of you, because it is a, you know, as I said before, it's quite an intimate, personal relationship. So I guess once you find that, you know, sometimes it's a little sticky. It doesn't go so well, but then that's true of everything, you know, true of your own work, true of all your collaborations. So yeah, I think I've been quite lucky, and I think that, I think maybe we've been well matched, and I've been lucky that people have been quite reasonable, and, you know, and I, you know, I've done this quite a bit now, so I kind of know how it works and what to do. And I think that they respect that aspect of things, that, you know, I kind of run the process. So yeah, I've been quite fortunate, and, you know, it's nice work. I mean, I have to say that I feel very grateful to have it. There's something lovely about bringing your skills to bear on any project. And, you know, my skill is, you know, making books. And I enjoy doing that. And I enjoy working with people and bringing their stories to the fore. And I'm able to make a living as a writer between the various things that I do. So I think,
that's quite rare in South Africa to make a living as a writer.
So I feel very grateful for it. It's good.
And everything's fixable, isn't it? So even if you have an interview today didn't go quite as well as the previous interview, it can still be fixed on the page. It's not a disaster. It's not like a live interview or something like that.
No, and of course you produce it in sort of pieces, you know, it's a couple of chapters at a time they might look at. I try not to overwork it before I've got sort of quite close to the end. I like them to see it as a process. The way that we tend to do it is sort of give the subject a couple of chapters, you know, once we've only got 4 or 5 maybe to have a look at. I don't like to do too much work on it before we've got a bit of bulk behind us. And I generally like to do the interviews and the writing first, and then, you know, go through the book and do the edits and fill things in and so on a bit later. So that's the way it generally works.
Can we talk about the agony chef now? Or do you still have more
I'm so interested in that book.
So the Agony Chef, which is delightful. I don't know if there's any point in me punting it because I don't know if it's available anywhere.
Sadly not. I don't think so, but it was fun at the time.
It sits on my recipe shelf. And it probably shouldn't, because it's also maybe should be on a bookshelf with other works of fiction. Talk to us about it. Explain what it is. And also how, because in your writing history, it's quite a unique book, in that it's not a collaboration. How was it different for you, the writing process?
So that was the first book that I wrote. And in many ways, I think it's the book that is most like me. So it's a humorous book. And it has food in it, and these are two things that I love, as you know. So the setup is that this woman, Delilah, solves vexing modern-day problems, like an agony aunt would, but with sort of sardonic advice and a recipe. Mm-hmm. And it's divided like that. So I invented, and I'm fairly proud of this, the idea of passive-aggressive cooking, in which somebody wrote in, and I can't quite remember the setup now, she'd had some sort of spat or other with her husband, and she felt sort of deeply resentful about having to make food all the time. So the suggestion from Delilah was that, you indulge in passive-aggressive cooking, to a certain extent that that it's not actively aggressive, like you're not refusing to do it, but it's, salad for dinner on a Wednesday night and things like that. So
in the middle of winter.
In the middle of winter, yeah. So all of those kinds of things. And yeah, it was fun. It got nicely reviewed. I had fun doing it. I mean, I wouldn't mind doing another one, but I don't think there's scope for that. But it is, in a way, I think the most like my voice, my most sort of natural voice.
And when you look back at the process, does it feel like fun, or does it feel like you missed the collaboration? And maybe that's a bad question for me to ask as one of your collaborators. I won't take it personally.
I found that one quite easy to do on my own. And I think one of the reasons is that it was sort of little pieces of things. There was a introduction to a section, and then there was the question from the ostensible writer inner, and then there was the answer, and then there was the recipe. So it was kind of easy to manage, and I had millions of ideas. I didn't feel like I needed additional ideas.
No dead bodies to keep track of.
I don't think there was one in that book. No, there wasn't. I don't think.
I don't remember one.
One thing I wanted to say about collaboration is that I mentioned that I came from a magazine background, and magazines are very collaborative. I was a magazine writer, a feature writer, and towards the end of my career as an editor. And as a magazine editor, you work with writers, you work with art directors and freelance photographers and so on. And a magazine is really put together, it really does take a village, or a large group of zany people to make a magazine. And I think that might be one of the reasons why I find collaboration easy and fun. I've always enjoyed it. I've always enjoyed working with other people. I often believe that with the right people, the sum is greater than the what is it?
The whole is greater than the sum of the parts.
Yeah, I believe that with the right people, the whole is better than the sum of the part, greater than the sum of the parts. And yeah, I've been lucky in a lot of my collaborations, and I consider the ghostwriting and co-writing to be a collaboration as well.
And speaking of the Katie Gayle collaboration, can you break down for us exactly how you and Gail split up the writing? Because that's what I'm very interested to hear about.
So I'm the lead writer on the project. So I do the writing, the bulk of the writing.
Right.
We plot together. Mm-hmm. We bring different things to the plotting. I think Gail's a better plotter than me. Unfortunately, both of us have like an inability to remember things. So I really feel like we should have had one of us at least would be good at that. But anyway, we do what we can.
We didn't know this before we started, in our defense.
I actually blame you, because I thought that you were a brilliant plotter. You have lots of ideas.
When I can remember what I've done with the body, and then I'm okay.
So you plot together, and then you, Kate, will do some writing on it. Then does Gail come behind you and read over what you've written, or how does it work? Do you email each other?
We work in Google Docs, so it's an open document. Mm-hmm. So I will write a couple of chapters. Gail will come and read them. We'll discuss them. She might fill in something, sort out a pacing thing, whatever. And meanwhile, I'll just be carrying on with my life and writing away.
I think what's also important there, we don't track changes while we're doing that.
Oh,
so when
interesting.
I come in and fix, so the things I'm most likely to fix are small tweaks. And then sometimes Kate gets so excited either to get to a joke. Kate will write 10 pages to set up a joke.
It's really not too much trouble. I don't know why you keep saying that.
Either she's rushing to her joke or she's rushing to a very exciting part of the plot, and the pacing. And this is what's nice about working together. When you write on your own, you don't pick up pacing problems until you edit, but we pick it up while it's happening. And then I might add a paragraph to just stretch the pacing out, but I won't mark it up. Kate says she can identify when I've done it. I don't know if that's true. Kate, is it true?
What I think it is. But what we do is we comment on, we use that comment function. So I'll quite often say to Gail, a new bit here, or, not sure if we're going to use this person, thought this could be a suspect, or, whatever. And then we'll have a little sidebar. So we do that. And then Gail does a sort of a read through and an edit at the end, or not only at the end, on the way through. She tends to do the edits with the publisher as well.
Right.
So we do different things in the different parts of the process. It works really well. I mean, we've both found, I think, we found it quite a fun and interesting experience to work together. When we say we plot, by the way, we don't plot the whole book.
Right.
I mean, this was another fantasy I had. I thought that Gail would plot the whole book and I would be able to know what happened next. Sadly, neither of us know what happens next. So that's... Yeah, but we have fun doing it, and I feel like,
and sometimes
life is short. You may as well enjoy your writing collaborations. So we have fun. We have a laugh,
And sometimes we try to plot the whole book, but then in the writing, something comes up and we realize so-and-so is a much better murderer, or so we've just changed a body.
We have, yeah.
We were very fixed on one body and then we realized that another body would be much better. So we're murdering off a different person.
Okay.
That's the reality
and
of
in
writing.
our previous book,
write.
we unmurdered somebody who we'd already murdered because I was like, I feel so sad about blah, blah, her name. And Gail said, actually, so do I. And I said, I don't think we should kill her. And Gail said, okay, maybe we won't kill her. And then we had to go back and do another thing to her that she wasn't dead. So she lived.
Badly injured.
She got a cough instead. so she lives and breathes another day. And the other thing that I find very fun about writing together with Gail is that I'm a very reader-focused writer. Mm-hmm. I think about the reader and I want them to have a nice time.
Right.
I want them to have a laugh. I want them to have a surprise. I like my reader and I want them to be happy. And Gail is my first reader.
Right.
Because she obviously reads as soon as I've written. So I often write things into, Gail's going to love this, or here's a little joke for Gail. I think it's kind of a nice thing. Like I give her little in-joke sometimes.
Mm-hmm. But with the result that there are some jokes in the Katie Gayle that Gail said, I literally am the only person in the world who will get that joke. But that joke is there for us. And then we have some jokes for South African writers.
We
readers,
do, yeah. We have done, I can't remember them now. But
the one is we have a very picturesque, lovely road called Hillbrow Avenue.
Oh, yes, that's right. We
yes.
do that, in the Cotswolds.
And I'm also interested to know how you guys resolve conflict or differences of opinion, which leads into my other question. You can answer these two together if you like. What is the hardest thing about this kind of co-writing process?
We don't have a huge amount of conflict. In fact, we hardly have any. I mean, I think both of us are in it to have an enjoyable writing experience. Mm-hmm. We're also quite lucky that these books have been doing well.
Yes.
And I think that makes you a lot easier to deal with in life.
When things are going well.
Yeah, it does. And we're a lot more, we're sort of committed to the partnership. We're committed to the series. So we're quite invested in resolving our issues, and we honestly don't have a lot of conflict.
Mm-hmm. Talk about your grandmother, Kate.
Oh, there's my grandmother, yes. So I wrote this really nice character called Dora, who is my English grandmother. And she died when I was little. And she owns a little sweet shop in the village.
This is the character, not
the character.
Kate's
No, not my real grandmother.
Right.
She owns the little sweet shop in the village. And I wrote her in and I said to Gail, I I've got a new character. She's so great. I'm so happy with her. You're going to have such fun reading her. Because, I like Gail to have a nice afternoon read. And I said, she's named after my English grandmother. So she reads and she says to me, I really love Dora. She's really great. I think she could be the murderer. I said, are you absolutely insane? We're not having my English grandmother murdering people.
And I am still a bit fixated on that plot.
And then I brought her back in this book and that I'm writing at the moment. And I said to Gail, you'll be so happy Dora's back. And she says, the readers are going to be so unhappy when she starts murdering people off.
I think you must watch Dora's back. I think Gail might actually murder her one of these days.
But that is literally the biggest conflict we've had. We really don't have much conflict. We also have learned to read each other well. If Kate says we'll put that on the back burner, it means that was a crap idea and don't you dare raise it again. And I now go, okay, we'll put it on the back burner. We've learned what each other's clues are. I don't know what my clue is, but...
Yeah, I mean, I think we have learned that. And I think we've learned a lot about the process of writing together and about writing these kinds of books. So, this is our 8th book together, the one we're writing now. Yeah. Because we wrote 3 in the first series and this is 5 in the second series. So, we kind of know what works for us. And, I think it's been a really, really nice, fun partnership. I'm quite happy.
And it's doing well, so we've made peace with the fact that we might be doing this for the rest of our lives.
I mean, I do sometimes feel like I'm on an absolute sort of treadmill of writing, between my commercial work and the Katie Gayle work and all the other things. Sort of like thousands of words coming in and out of my brain. I feel like my brain sometimes is kind of a bit broken by that. But, I get back in the saddle. Yeah, it's good.
Kate, maybe with that you can explain how, we have a slightly unusual publisher compared to traditional publishers, and we have very tight deadlines as a result of how they work. Maybe you can explain a bit about that.
We do. So this book is published by Bookateur, which is a British publisher. They were the leading and I think the earliest digital first publisher. So they're part of Hachette, which is one of the giants.
Yes.
And they focus on a particular market of reader who read a lot.
Right. The whale readers.
The whale readers. Yeah. So that's what they call them. So these are people who might read 2-3 books a week. They mostly read on e-reader, on Kindle or some other version thereof. And they like to read series is another aspect of them. In a very
specific genre. They have their genre and they don't stray outside of that usually.
Yeah, that's right. Or maybe 2 genres or what have you. But they know what they want to read. They want to read a lot of them and they buy a lot of books. So the market is really geared towards those people. And most of what we sell are on ebook or audiobook. Audiobook is huge in that market as well. We do sell, in the UK and the US, we sell print books. They're not available here because of the way that market works, unfortunately for our South African friends. So it's a very different way of publishing. It's a very high volume, low price. So you'll often find that there are books on special for, summer reads or whatever it is, some promotion. You can get them for 99p or $1.99 or what have you.
Yeah.
So it's a very, very different kind of publishing model to what we're used to here. And it's also, because it's so largely digital, it's quite algorithmically driven. So they can see what works. They can test different ads, online and say, okay, this one worked better than that one. They can test different cover designs. They can see who's buying what. They can offer them the 3rd book in the series because they bought the 2nd book in the series, so they can reach readers in a very different way. And it's been an absolutely incredible education working with them. They're very, very professional, brilliant editors we've worked with there. And I think we've both learned a lot about modern publishing from this experience.
Absolutely. And because we're writing for the whale reader, we basically, so when you write for a traditional publisher, if you write 4 books a year, that would be a problem. It's too many books for them to bring out in your name in a year. If Kate and I could write 4 Katie Gayles a year, they would publish 4 Katie Gayles a year. I think they find our current output of 2 a year a little bit frustrating, that maybe we should be doing 3 a year. So it's a completely different mindset, wouldn't you say, Kate?
Yeah, I think it is. I mean, I think we've we've got another one to come. So we'll be doing, under this contract, our 6th Julia Bird. Mm-hmm. And some of the people that are our stablemates, I mean, particularly people who do the kind of more detective-y things. I mean, somebody the other day had their 17th book, I think. Mm. Right. Their 17th in the series. And people are selling, I mean, some of the top people on the list are selling in the millions.
Right.
Over the series. So, yeah, it is a very different approach.
Kate, I'm just telling you now that if we get to 17, Dora is going to have to be the murderer at some point.
Kate, getting back to the sort of biographical co-writing for a moment, I'm interested in how you decide to construct the story. And I would imagine it depends on whether the person's life has been interesting or their career has been interesting, or one thing happened to this person that was interesting. So do you construct it chronologically? Because I imagine the person tells you their story chronologically. I was born in so-and-so and then I moved to so-and-so. Or do you sort of construct it episodically? Does it relate to the way a novel is constructed in any way?
That's such a good question. And I think that it does. I think, like any book that you write, fiction or non-fiction, whatever you might be writing, you're making these editorial choices of how best to tell the story. So I think one of the things that we do as writers, whatever we're writing, is to think about how we construct the story, where we start, where we end, how we structure it, and so on. For most memoir or biography or anything like that, there's a natural chronological progression.
Right.
But that doesn't mean you start with, I was born in 1942 and da-da-da-da-da. Mm. As you say, it was a very perceptive, your way of looking at it actually, is that many people who I'm going to be working with, their backstory is useful and interesting because it talks about who they are. Mm. But you don't really want to start introducing that first. You don't want to go through like 30 years of, backstory and childhood and so on necessarily before you get to the part where our fictional subject kicks the ball.
Right.
So generally I would start closer to the kind of current action and then maybe have some other reference to the early part of the story. So I guess it's about finding an entry point, finding a rhythm for the story, giving enough backstory to the kind of story where the present moment is more pressing, that it makes sense of their decisions and it makes sense of what they've been doing and of their choices.
Do you ever get pushback from the subject about where the story should start and what should be included? I mean, do you get people who think that their sort of nursery school life is so fascinating it needs to be there and you have to kind of talk them out of that?
No, it's not usually a problem. I mean, I think that people are very attached to certain parts of their life history, and to their story, and there's certain things that people do generally want in. But I think that's never been something there's been sort of conflict over. I feel that it's something that, one can often deal with those things quite easily and subtly and add in at a certain point what needs to be in and out. There's certain things that people want to leave out is usually more of an issue. And I think that's generally because they're interpersonal issues with family members or, work people or whatever, where they don't want, where they don't want to cause conflict. And that's slightly more difficult because sometimes that conflict would be useful to the story.
I'd imagine that's where the really interesting stuff lies and the stuff they don't want to say.
In some cases, and sometimes it's more of kind of color and texture. But you don't want to be self-censoring to such a degree that all of that's out. But, I think it's easy enough to find a balance. And I think particularly once we've established a relationship and they trust me to tell their story, and they know that I know what I'm doing, we can negotiate those points. But at the end of the day, it really is their story. And if they don't ever want to mention their mother, they don't have to mention their mother, That's the way it is.
Kate, I am a little bit obsessed with process and with how much a writer writes a day. And I realize I haven't asked you this yet because I actually do know the answer, but not everybody else knows the answer. You often are juggling a few projects. I've seen your spreadsheets and, you are, by the nature of all the projects you work on, you're under deadlines. You aren't just freely writing for your own joy. How many words do you write a day? And how do you structure your writing day so that you don't have a nervous breakdown?
Yet. I don't have a nervous breakdown yet. I normally I try to work on 2 projects at a time. I usually have one Katie Gayle and then one other project. Sometimes the other projects overlap a bit, and then I have 3, and that does my head in, obviously. So I really try and keep it to 1 and 1. And I usually divide the day up. I quite often I'm quite good creatively in the very early morning. So if I get up very early, I'll do a bit of Katie Gayle writing, which I find I need my sort of fresh brain for. And then I quite often do my other job in the morning, and then Katie Gayle in the afternoon and evening. It really depends. I mean, if I'm coming up to deadline as we are now in Katie Gayle, I will do the math and I'll go, okay, I need to write 25,000 words in the next 6 weeks or whatever. And then I will probably set my deadline like that. I mean, I can easily write 1,000 words a day on the Katie Gayle books when I'm going. I tend to sort of get stuck and sort of put it off a bit because I'm about to start a difficult section. I don't know what to do. But once I'm writing, I can write very fast and quickly and easily. And so, yeah, I could write 2,000 a day if I'm going. And then the other work, it really depends because a lot of that time is around the interviewing, around, talking to the person about what's gone in the past and editing and that sort of thing. So it's a little bit different. I'm not just sort of deciding on my own to go and sit down and write those words. But, it's a good few words a day that I get through.
It sometimes exhausts me, and I will go into the Katie Gayle thinking that maybe I'll have a few hundred words to read and find that I've actually do have a lovely afternoon in front of me because so much has been done, and I get quite caught up as a reader. I do. Kate is the master of, in fact, let me ask you about this. You are the master of the small detail, telling the story. Julia Bird is always eating lovely meals. The garden always looks lovely. The hens always are up to something, laying eggs or not laying eggs or running around with the dog. How naturally does that come to you? Or how much do you think, okay, I better bring a hen back. I better bring some food in?
One of the things I've noticed about writing is I often, in so much as I write to amuse you and entertain you, I write to amuse and entertain myself. And those are the things that's the way my brain works. I like to think about those kind of things. So I like to think about what the garden would be like, what she'd be having for tea, what the dog would be doing on a hot summer's day, what would be in the garden, all those kinds of things. I think those things are, part of the kind of richness of creating the world and the scene. And they're very much important in terms of those kinds of books as well, because one of the things about the cozy mysteries is that they're very location based. So this one, as you know, takes place in the Cotswolds. And, readers like to have that feel of place. And in fact, I went to the Cotswolds this year to do a bit of research.
Because neither of us had set foot in the Cotswolds for the first 4 books.
I've been to lots of English villages in my defense. So that was quite fun. So, I do think it is a really important part of the story. And it's also, it's also fun for the reader. They like to see what's going on in the world. You can't just be lurching from murder to murder without any.
It puts the cozy in cozy mystery. Those are the lovely details that the readers enjoy.
Yeah, it does. It does.
And makes the readers hungry because it makes the co-writers hungry. I frequently have to stop and eat.
I love writing about food.
Kate, you are much in demand as an interviewer, a discussant on panels, a moderator. I know this because I've requested you myself to interview me for a book launch. So what would be the tips that you would give someone on how to do that well? Because we all know you do it very well.
Thank you. That's very kind of you to say. I do think that preparation is really important. I am a bit of an over-preparer generally when it comes to interviewing people, whether it's on stage or on a panel or whatever. I think it's really important to read the books and to think about the books. And it's a lot of work. If you're going to do a panel, we've just had Kingsmead Book Fair, Franschhoek Book Fair. I was on a panel with 4 writers, moderating a panel. That's 4 books you have to read, 4 backstories you have to know about these people and so on. So it is a lot of work. But I think it really does pay off to actually, do that groundwork. It's really nice if you can have a bit of give and take and a bit of interaction between the writers. And I think also to know what audiences are interested in.
Right.
I think that people generally love conversations about writing process. I find it amazing how much interest there is in that. And also to let the author shine and let them have that space as well, I think is quite important.
I think that's the most important. I think that's one of the things you're very good at. I think the fatal flaw of some interviewers is that they talk about themselves instead of about the author and the author's book. There definitely are some interviewers of our gender who talk about themselves for 20 minutes before the author has a chance to say a word. I think I was in a panel at Franschhoek where literally the interviewer spoke for 20 minutes before anybody else spoke.
Goodness, wow, yeah, that's not right.
And Kate, I don't know if you would agree. I think that for me, that's a fatal flaw in an interviewer.
Yes, I think it is. I think that you have to realize that people want to hear from the authors rather than the interviewer generally.
And even if the interviewer is a very important author, they're not there as an author. They're there as a facilitator. They're there to make the other authors look good, I think.
Well, I see it as also they're there to entertain the audience and to keep the conversation rolling in a way that gives good exposure to the authors, but also, people have come out in their private time to come and sit in a bookstore at 6:00 in the evening on a cold Johannesburg evening. They want to be entertained and to learn something and to hear something and have fun.
And on that note, Kate, what advice would you give to a nervous first-time author? It's their first panel or their first launch, and they're being interviewed, and we've all seen that one where you ask a lovely question and then the author goes, yes.
Oh,
yeah. What advice would you give them to make it a good experience and make their book sell?
Well, first of all, I think if you can try and relax a little bit, maybe have like a third of a glass of wine and maybe come half an hour early and chat to the interviewer and have a little bit of a pre-conversation so that you both know what's coming. I think that's quite helpful because I think mostly people are nervous. They either talk too much and too fast or they do the yes/no thing, which is just absolutely horrifying. Yeah. But yeah, I think those are the most important things. And just try and enjoy it. It's such a special thing. My word, like you've done the thing, you've written the book and you're up there on stage. It's great.
Well, I love that advice. Kate, we've got to the part of the interview where we like to ask people what they have been reading or watching or listening to lately that has made some kind of an impression on them.
Yes, and I am prepared for this question because I've been listening to your podcast. And I had to write it down because 2 names. So I've been reading, well, first of all, I have to say that I've had a bit of a terrible reading spate for a while. I couldn't get into things. This is about, I don't know, maybe 6 months ago, whatever. And if you're a reader, reading is like the most wonderful, wonderful thing. And I just realized how bad it was for my mental health not to be engaged in a book and how much better I feel when I'm properly engaged in a book. So I'm grateful to say that I've had quite a lot of good engaging reads. And the one that I've read most recently is called Girls of Little Hope. It's by Sam Beck-Bessinger and Dale Halverson. It's quite new. It only came out in the last, I think, few days. I got a copy from the publisher. And it's a dark suspense thriller. It's set in small-town America in the 90s, and it's billed as for fans of Stranger Things, and that actually tells you all you really need to know about it. It's about 3 teenage girls, and it starts off with a bang. I do like a book that starts off with a bang. You're right in the heart of the story before as soon as you opened it. These 3 teenage girls have gone off into the woods outside this little town, and only 2 of them come back. So it's immediately, obviously, it's a thriller. What's happened to them. It's a really good page turner. But what I really like about it is that it's a book about young girls. I think they're 15 or so. So it's a book about teenage angst. It's a book about teenage friendship, which sounds a bit sort of, childish in a way, but I love those kinds of books. I really found it such a nice read.
And they're South African, am I right?
They are South African. Sam wrote that book, Manage Your Money Like a Fucking Grown Up, which has been very, very successful.
Yes.
And Dale Halverson is also a graphic artist, I think graphic.
He works as Joey Hi-Fi.
Works as Joey Hi-Fi. He's done some fantastic cover designs. So they really know what they're doing. They both sort of quite steeped in various genres, including horror. It's a page turner, and it's a good read. I enjoyed that.
Yeah, that book landed on my desk as well recently, and I've just glanced at it so far, but I see the backstory of one of the girls that appears in the blurb is that she was taken on the pageant circuit by her sort of stage mommy, and she responded to that by getting fat.
Yes.
So that she could no longer be forced to participate in pageants. And I love that idea so much. I can't wait to get into this book.
It's really good. I mean, they go sort of backwards and forwards in time, so you get to know these girls quite well. And that special time of life with all that teenage angst and that worry and that fun and that deep meaningful bonds that they have. I mean, it really is quite lovely. I liked it a lot. I've also been reading Johnny Steinberg's book, but I know you've interviewed him on your podcast, so I don't need to talk about that, the Mandela book. And I've just started literally the first page of Daryl Bristow-Bovey's book, Endurance, which is brand new, just in the shelves in the last couple of days. So I'm really looking forward to that. I hear great things about that. And then the other thing is, as I think you probably know, I read a lot of poetry. I started that Rhyme Share Poetry Club on Facebook, which has been, such a lovely source of people sharing poems that they've enjoyed. But there's a podcast that I would recommend for people who like poetry or would like to know more about it or get to know new poets and so on. It's called Poetry Unbound. And the host is Padraig Tuma. I don't know if you've ever come across him. He's a poet, but also just an incredibly insightful person. He did sort of conflict resolution. He's Irish, so he's got a lovely Irish accent. He did a conflict resolution kind of work. And he's a very, very thoughtful person about the sort of human condition. And Poetry Unbound is part of that On Being Studios, which is Krista Tippett. I don't know if you're familiar with that series of podcasts, also very good. But anyway, it's really lovely. So what he does is he reads a poem, and these are all contemporary poems from all over the world. He reads a poem, he discusses it, partly to do with, the structure and, how it is, but also just the kind of human feeling behind it and what it means and why it's important. And, just he's lovely, 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 gentle manner. And then he reads it again. So you get a chance to kind of hear it a second time, knowing what the heck's going on. So that's really good if you want to sort of learn a bit about poetry. And they're short. I mean, it's about 12 to 15 minutes, the podcast. Anyway, it's great. And then the other podcast I listen to regularly and I've been listening to recently is that People I Mostly Admire. It comes from Steve Levitt, who's one of the Freakonomics guys. Mm-hmm. And it's always a one-on-one interview with a really fascinating person. It can be a scientist or an economist or an arty person, all different kinds of people. And he's just such a great interviewer, such a great, generous, interesting guy with, he obviously wears an economist's hat. But he's very interesting. He's very good in front of the mic. So I would recommend that as well.
Well, fantastic. Those are great recommendations. Kate, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. We hope that even more people buy and read the Katie Gayle books, as well as your other co-writing projects. Thank you very much for your time.
Such a pleasure. It was a great honor to be invited. Thank you.
Gail, that was such an interesting conversation. I honestly don't know how you and Kate get anything done when there's so many interesting things to talk about.
Well, it was interesting for me because it's quite a unique position to be in. We've interviewed people we're friends with before on the pod, but this is Kate and I have a very specific kind of friendship because we work together and we talk to each other a lot. Mm-hmm. And it was such an interesting experience to get to interview her and ask her questions, because normal conversation, you don't sit down and start asking each other questions in such a deliberate way. So for me, it was an unusual and interesting experience.
So what new thing did you get out of that conversation?
Well, I think that's part of it that I didn't get out in the way I normally do, because Kate and I have talked about writing a lot and we know a lot about each other's writing styles and processes. But the thing that I got out was a confirmation of something I have always felt to be true about myself, and that is that I could not ghostwrite. Right. It does not sound at all attractive to me. Mm-hmm. And learning more about how it works didn't make me go, oh, maybe I should rethink this. It made me go, absolutely, that is one of the things I will not do.
You know, I was interested in it for years, and I don't think there's space in my life for it at the moment, but I still find it absolutely fascinating. And what I got out of it was a lesson that can be applied to constructing all narratives, which is, what is the best way to tell the story? And of course, when it's somebody's memoir or biography, the temptation to be chronological is very strong. And to know where exactly to start the story and how to weave the backstory through it, that was all very interesting to me. And Kate obviously has that instinct to start in the most interesting part where there is stuff happening and not necessarily give way to that very tempting construction of starting it chronologically.
And Fiona, it goes back to what we were talking about at the beginning today, the challenge you're facing at the moment, and how do you start the story? Where do you start? How do you structure a story? And I think it is something Kate is really excellent at. I always look forward to us starting a new Katie Gayle, because I never know where she's going to pick it up. I know it's going to be some delicious domestic detail.
Yeah.
But I look forward to that opening paragraph every time.
Oh, I love that. That sounds great. So what is your writing advice for the week, Gail?
Well, Fiona, you know, I have a terrible memory, so I'm not really sure if I've given this advice before, but I decided instead of checking, it's such a useful thing for me that if I have said it before, it bears saying again. You know, we talk a lot, and I have this great interest in how many words do you write every day? You need to write every day. If you want to be a writer, you need to sit down, you need to get the writing out. One of my tricks that really works for me is stopping in the middle while you're still excited, not emptying the muse for the day. So you're writing well, and the temptation is you've written your 500 or your 300 or your 1,000 or whatever it is for you, but you're still into it and you're still excited, and the temptation is to write until that tank is empty.
Yes.
And I say don't. I say stop, because then tomorrow you will come back to the page so excited to pick it up again. And I really hope I haven't said that recently, but it does bear repeating. And you, Fiona, what's your advice?
I just want to say that I love that advice, and I don't think we've actually talked about it before. Sure. So going back to what I was saying earlier about doing my first self-edit, and immediately realizing that I'd written something bad and boring. And, you know, there was a little part of my brain that said, it's fine. It's okay. It's not as bad as you think. Just keep going. Just leave it. It's too much of an effort to fix it. And I had to override that instinct and say, no, this is terrible. You cannot leave it the way it is, but you can fix it. And the fix it's quite dramatic, but it's not nearly as bad as you think. And I plunged in and started fixing it. So my advice would be, listen to that little voice in your head that is saying, this isn't your usual self-doubt. This is a problem that needs to be fixed. Don't leave it there. Don't overlook it. If you're bored, the reader's going to be bored as well. Fix it. Everything on the page can be fixed.
Oh, goodness, Fiona. I think that might be exactly the thing that I need to hear but don't want to hear at the moment. But thank you.
So if any of our listeners have had to fix something, if they've listened to that little voice, if they have found a really good way to start a narrative or had to restart a narrative, or as Gail said, ditch the first chapter and start with chapter 2, please get in touch. We're on all social media and we'd love to hear from you.
You've been listening to another production from Solid Gold Podcasts.